Hi, hello, Esteban XR here, and today I am going to be covering a walkthrough on how to design a base level, a basic level for The Witcher 3 utilizing the Witcher 3 RedKit Red Engine. So we'll start off by doing the initial project setup, and then I'll cover briefly how to set up a repository and link it to the RedKit. I found that really useful just because it was a very nice way to have a historical change set of all my track changes, and whether the engine crashed or I lost any files, I could easily revert back and keep my level intact. So we'll cover that, but then we will move on to setting up your basic terrain. So that includes your terrain parameters. I'll cover how to sculpt the terrain and then paint and assign textures onto the terrain, and then paint flora, vegetation, trees, shrubs onto your terrain. And then finally, we will summarize by previewing our level as Geralt. So we will utilize the built-in player character controller to run around the level that we just designed and built. So let's dive right in. All right, so what we want to do first is we want to navigate to Steam, the Steam store, and type in RedKit. Now the RedKit is free. You just have to add it to your library, and once you add it to your library, you can then start the install. And then from there, you'll just be able to come here and access it from your Steam library. So once we have our RedKit installed, we can launch it. And the first thing we'll see is this window here. Now we will have to do some first time setup items. So first we just want to set up a place in our drive, in our local computer drive, and set up two folders. The first folder is going to be for the game files. So these are all the game assets coming from the RedKit. And then the second folder is going to be where our mod, our personal projects are going to live. All right, at this time, this would be a good time to set up our repository if you wish to do so. I set up a repo with the GitHub desktop application. And it's pretty straightforward. I just treated the RedKit as I would treat any other game engine like Unity, where I set up an ignore file, and it is looking specifically for any 3D asset texture files that I may edit, and it adds those to my change list if I change those files or edit or modify those files in any way. Okay, so this is the first thing we will see when we open up the RedKit. Now, one thing I did was I just set my UI to be in dark mode. The Red engine just got that option from CD Projekt Red. So if you like to navigate your engines in dark mode, you can assign that. From here, we can start our new world. So we hit the new world option on the upper left, and then we can go ahead and name our new world. All right, so this is a good moment just to start getting familiarized with some of the important menus of the RedKit. And one of the most important menus inside the RedKit is the asset browser. So much like Unity and Unreal and other mainstream engines, the asset browser is your main library and catalog of all the assets that you can use. So this is going to include all the character models from The Witcher 3, all the weapons from The Witcher 3, scripts, audio files, props. All that is usable for your mod. So utilizing the search bar, you can search for any assets, and you can also display them in a grid mode. And then from here, you can drag them into your world. So now that we're familiar with the asset browser, we're going to start by creating our first terrain. So we access the terrain setup tool, and I'll cover these parameters from top to bottom. So the first parameter is setting up your tile set number. So we assign our tile sets. We can also assign our terrain tile resolution, the edge length of our terrain, the minimum elevation for our terrain, and the highest elevation point. So if we think of mountains, this is going to be the highest possible Y value that our terrain is going to go. And one important thing here that I noticed is that if you don't have enough tile sets for your terrain size, then interestingly enough, your character controller is not going to be able to move. You're not going to be able to walk on your map. So this was something that I learned, and I just thought I would communicate that because that will seriously hinder your workflow if you're unable to run around your map. But with that in mind, we can now generate our terrain, and our initial terrain will look like this. It will be flat. The next step now is to start painting terrain textures, terrain materials onto our terrain. But in order to do that, we need to assign some terrain textures to our terrain palette brush. So the way to do that is we can go to our asset browser. In our asset browser, we can type in terrain underscore material. And this will give us some of the in-game materials that are used across the terrains. So I've selected this Skellige terrain material. And upon selecting it, it's assigned to our terrain texture palette. And these are all the terrain textures that come with that terrain material. So you can see we have rock, cliff, dirt, grass textures. So this is basically what we'll be using to paint our level. All right, now we can start sculpting our terrain. So we're going to navigate over here to the sculpt brush, and we are going to start adding some basic geography. So here we can control the radius or the size of our brush. We can also control the intensity of our brush. So this is how much is applied to raise the height map of the terrain. You can have a more subtle intensity to do more smaller rolling hills, or you can crank up your intensity value to have really drastic jagged mountains. So first I'm just going to start blocking out some basic geography. Then I'm going to speed through a couple of minutes of work just to show how I'm going to do an additional detail pass for smaller erosion, do an erosion layer and go in there with a smaller brush and add some noise and distortion. Basically add a distortion mask, paint that noise in, and then we'll start getting some more organic looking terrain. Now I'm going to start painting some terrain textures onto my terrain. So I'll start by painting some cliff texture onto some of these slopes. And this is where you use some of your natural eye with getting your composition right. So we want to paint some rock along some of the slopes, and we will complement that with some of the pebble textures and some of the erosion textures, and we will put some of those alongside the crevices in between the slopes. And then of course we have the existing grass texture, and we have some other finer pebbles that we'll use here. So I'll take a couple minutes just to texture this ridge, and then we'll move on to foliage. And if we wanted to see how our terrain textures look at different times of the day, there is also a time of day slider that we can access here from the environment editor menu, and we can test our terrain under different daylight. Now we can go in and add some foliage. So we open up our asset browser and type in Vegetation Brush or VBrush. And we can now see a couple of the vegetation brushes available in The Witcher 3. So we'll go ahead and select a few. I've selected a couple of brushes that have dead trees and some dry trees. So once you've selected your brushes, every brush has an X number of trees that you can use to paint onto your terrain. So now that we have our brushes selected, we can select our brush, we select our tree type, and we can start painting some trees. Okay, so at this point, we can preview our level. We already have a terrain, some terrain textures. We placed down some foliage. We can preview our level. I also went ahead and I started working on some additional areas of the map. This is just me blocking out my points of interest, my POIs. I have a watchtower over here now, and there's a village down there. I've placed down a dirt path, and we have my starting hill, which I started at the beginning of this video over here. So now if we want to go ahead and preview our level, we can just select the controller with the green check mark up here on the toolbar, and that's going to spawn Geralt, our player controller, wherever we left the editor camera off. So wherever you leave your editor camera, your player controller is going to spawn there. So here I am, and I can walk around to my level, and I can see what I just built. Well, that's it for today, and thank you so much for watching. I hope this video to be the first of a series of videos that focuses on the Witcher 3 RedKit. Today's video focused largely on the initial setup process and how to build that initial terrain and how to start customizing that terrain. And I hope future videos to focus on interactions, how to spawn enemies, and how to generate nav meshes. So stay tuned for those as I'll be learning that next. But once again, thank you and hit like and subscribe. And this is Esteban XR, and I will see you next time.